Hi everybody, this is Andrea for the Learning Bear podcast. Today we're sort of doing a continuation of the summer series that I've been doing, but this is also an activity that you can do anytime, any place. It doesn't require very many supplies, and you really just need to know about the myth of the mermaid. Of the small amount of supplies that you do need, it's some way to write things down, which can be a chalkboard, which could also just be a sidewalk if you don't have a chalkboard but you have chalk, a whiteboard, for dry erase markers, or paper and writing utensil, etc. Just some way for your kids to be able to write something down. That's all you need for this activity. So, do you know the myth of the mermaid? The myth of the mermaid came from the sailors that were doing all of these long trips across the ocean, and in that time they used very prosy language to describe things in their letters back home and in their journals. And so they used this very flowery language. And based on the accounts that included this flowery language, that's where the myth of the mermaid came from. They were actually describing, or so it says, they were actually describing a manatee. But when you start looking at like this picture and its curves and, manatees are very curvy, and you also think about a mermaid maybe had really sad eyes. Manatees have very sad look on their face. So when you kind of like squint your eyes a little bit and use a little imagination, a manatee could be a mermaid, and that's where it comes from. So to get started with your students or your children, whoever, ask them to close their eyes and picture a mythical creature. You can add in a water environment if you want to. If you don't want to, that's okay too. Mythical creature means something that you create in your mind. So maybe they visualize a mermaid, or maybe they visualize the Loch Ness Monster or Bigfoot or whatever creature they want to create in their mind. Then you provide the children with an opportunity to describe their creature. Now you can have them do this verbally, or you can have them have it written down. For time's sake, I would say verbally would probably be best, but you could definitely add an additional layer of writing to this assignment as well. And then just to kind of keep things on track as a group, whether you have one kid or a bunch of kids, compile a list of mythical creatures, which can include superheroes or whatever, anything that's fictional. Compile a list, and I've given you some suggestions here, like a chimera, a griffin, a unicorn, Loch Ness Monster, and so on. You can do a quick Google search to talk about more if you want to, and if you're working with older kids, maybe you could ask them to do a Google search and find a mythical creature that's interesting to them, and you could take this in a different direction. But if you're working with younger kids, just start compiling a list of mythical creatures, and you'll see why you want this list momentarily. So now you're going to tell your children the mermaid story, okay? Then they are going to write their own poem, paragraph, story, etc., describing one of the creatures on the list. Now I had you make this list so that they could pick an animal or creature from that list. If you, especially the younger kids with their crazy, awesome imaginations, they'll just make up something that you've never heard of before. So you kind of want to rein it in a little bit, just so when it comes to guessing what they described, you kind of have some parameters to guess within. Make sure that they pick an animal that's from the list and they don't tell anybody, but ultimately they're trying to describe a creature in an interesting, fun way, to maybe trick you into thinking it was something else. So you can also, I've done this activity where I've pitted a mythical creature against a real creature, and I read a short, couple sentences, and my kids had to decide, was it a fictional thing or a real thing? And it was actually a lot of fun, and it was really hard, but I left one nugget in there that would sway it one way or the other. So it was really fun. That's another option for you as well. So an extension of this activity is, if they seemed to enjoy that first portion, is to connect it back to nature. And you can make a new list of animals that live in the ocean, or you could do the forest or mountains or whatever your child is interested in. And ask the students to write a description of them. You could do dinosaurs too if your kid's into dinosaurs, or birds, fish, so on. Again, you would need to ask, you again would guess which creature they are describing. A list of animals you could consider are dolphin, octopus, shark, squid, and so on. The way I've done this is I have some animal stencils that I got at Walmart for a couple dollars, and I poked out the center and I put it on a piece of construction paper so that you could see the animal better, and I laminated it. So I have these animal cards essentially, and I shuffle them up and I give them to them, and they have to pick an animal, and whatever animal they pick is the one that they have to describe. That way I know it's an animal that I've given them, so it's real. And sometimes if you give them too much freedom, they have a hard time making a decision. So if you've made the decision for them, sort of, I mean, they're picking, but if you've made the decision more narrow, they don't spend as much time trying to figure out what they want to do, especially if they're working in a small group. They argue about who they're going to do, and so it's just easier to give them like 10 cards. They pick a card, and that's who they describe. So that's worked really well for me as well. Here is an example of a short description of an animal, specifically a sea creature, that you could use as an example if you wanted to get their minds going a little bit. This creature eats fish and other things in the ocean. It has a parrot-like beak in the middle of long tubes. It swims by forcing water out of its body. It has gigantic, glistening eyes. Now, the key words here are the middle of long tubes, and depending on how much you know about ocean creatures, the beak might be beneficial. Those are the most important things. But then if you know how this animal moves through the water by forcing water out of its body, if you can visualize that, that might help you as well. So this animal is an octopus. Usually it comes down to octopus or squid because of the long tubes, but forcing the water out of their body. They're kind of like an umbrella opening and closing, how they move, and that's what this comes down to here. Now, I would like to mention that this activity is from Aquatic Wild. It's called Mermaids and Manatees, naturally. I don't take everything wholesale from that activity, but I do take a significant portion of it. So look to Aquatic Wild if you have questions. Aquatic Wild is one of the programs by Project Wild. So you can go to projectwild.org if you have questions. And then just as kind of an addendum, there's a similar activity available through Project Learning Tree called Can It Be Real? And this is where you can pit, is it real or is it not? That sort of scenario I was offering earlier. They have some worksheets that you can get through that as well. It's activity number 11. And so you can go to Project Learning Tree's website, sign up for a free account. You can take their modules online. The modules do cost, the account does not. And you can print off relevant worksheets for activities. Obviously, it's best if you have a manual so you know what activities you're looking for, because they don't give you the activity guidelines. They just give you the worksheets. So it would require you to take their class, but their class is interesting. They offer a different perspective on environmental education, so you should take it in. Check it out. As always, thank you for watching. Subscribe, share, and like. Have a great day, and I will